Richard Morgan was a very rich man, a self-made millionaire who earned his money through hard work and strong determination. At 55, he had been through a lot in life and had seen both the good and bad in people. He lived in a huge, luxurious estate on the edge of town, filled with everything money could buy. But despite all his wealth, he couldn't shake the deep emptiness he felt in his heart. The loneliness had led Richard to look for someone to be with, and that's when he met Claire. She was 26, full of energy, and very charming. Claire was beautiful, but it was her warmth and laughter that really attracted Richard. They had a quick, exciting romance, and soon after, they got married. But as time went on, Richard started to doubt her. Was Claire really in love with him? Or was she more interested in the comfort and security his money brought? Richard had been hurt before, by women who seemed sweet, but were only after his wealth. He couldn't shake the feeling that Claire, despite all her kindness, might be like those other women. These doubts began to take over his thoughts, affecting every moment they shared together. He needed to know the truth, but didn't want to ask her directly. He wanted to see if her love was real. So, he came up with a plan, a risky but classic test. He would pretend to be blind. Richard carefully planned the fake accident. One evening, he drove home from a business meeting, taking the scenic route. Later that night, his car was found at the bottom of a shallow ravine, with the windshield broken and airbags deployed. When Claire got the call, she was incredibly worried. Richard was taken to the hospital, where he pretended to be unconscious. The doctors ran tests, and Richard, using his money and connections, made sure the results would show temporary blindness caused by a head injury. The doctors told him it was unclear whether he would regain his sight or stay blind forever. When Richard finally woke up and was informed about his condition, he acted heartbroken, scared, and devastated. Claire stayed by his side the whole time, holding his hand, whispering comforting words, and telling him they would get through this together. Richard couldn't see her reactions, not just because he was pretending to be blind, but also because he wasn't sure if her care was genuine. He had to rely on her words, her touch, and the tone of her voice to judge if she was sincere. It was a risky move, but one he felt he had to make to find out the truth. Back home, life changed. Richard, now blind, depended on Claire for everything. She guided him around the house, cooked his meals, and even helped him get dressed. At first, Richard was nervous, expecting to see signs of frustration or hear a change in her voice. But as days turned into weeks, Claire's behavior stayed the same. She was patient, caring, and above all, loving. She spent hours reading to him, talking with him, and assuring him they would find a way to bring back his sight. Richard began to notice little things he hadn't before. How Claire knew exactly how he liked his coffee, how she played his favorite music softly in the background, and how she seemed to know what he needed before he even asked. Richard's heart still ached with doubt. Was this really love? Or was Claire just acting like a good wife to secure her place in his will? He felt he needed to push her further to find out the truth. He started making unreasonable demands. He would ask for meals at odd times, change his mind often about what he wanted to eat, and even pretended to have sudden mood swings. But each time, Claire responded with kindness and understanding, never losing her temper or showing any frustration. Then, Richard decided to test her loyalty. One night, with a heavy voice, he told her that he understood if she no longer wanted to stay with him. He said he was no longer the man she married and was now a burden. He even offered her a way out, saying he would give her a generous settlement if she chose to leave and start a new life. Claire was silent for a moment, and Richard's heart raced. Had he gone too far? Would she take the offer and leave? But then Claire spoke, her voice trembling with emotion. "Richard, I didn't marry you for your money or status. I married you because I love you. This situation is hard, but it doesn't change how I feel about you. I'm here for you, no matter what." Richard was shocked. Her words were sincere, filled with genuine emotion that couldn't be faked. For the first time in months, he began to doubt his own suspicions. Despite Claire's devotion, Richard's insecurities wouldn't go away. He still feared she might be hiding something from him. He started paying closer attention to her interactions with others, especially with their young gardener, Michael. Michael had worked for Richard for years, a reliable and hardworking man in his late 20s. Richard had never doubted him before, but now in his blindness, he became paranoid. He began to imagine that Claire and Michael were spending more time together, thinking she might be drawn to the youth and energy Richard could no longer offer. One afternoon, Richard pretended to nap in the garden and overheard a conversation between Claire and Michael. They were laughing together, their voices light and happy, something Richard hadn't heard from Claire in weeks. His heart sank and jealousy flared up inside him. "Thank you for helping me with the flowers, Michael," Claire said warmly. "It's no problem at all, Mrs. Morgan. Anything for you." Richard tensed at those words, his imagination running wild. Was Michael flirting with his wife? Was Claire interested in him? Richard couldn't bear the thought but couldn't confront them without revealing his secret. As days passed, Richard's suspicions grew. He noticed little things: a faint scent of cologne on Claire's clothes, her frequent trips to the garden, and the way she seemed happier when Michael was around. The uncertainty and fear of betrayal were driving him crazy. But whenever Richard hinted at his worries, Claire reassured him with a gentle touch and loving words. She seemed so genuine, so caring, but Richard's mind was clouded with doubt. He felt trapped by his own lie, unable to see the truth even when it was right in front of him. Richard's paranoia reached its peak one evening when he heard Claire talking on the phone in the next room. Her voice was quiet and intimate, sending a chill down his spine. He couldn't make out the words, but he feared she might be talking to Michael, planning to leave him. When Claire came back into the room, Richard could barely hide his anxiety. He asked her who she had been talking to, trying to keep his voice calm. "It was just my mother," Claire said casually. "She wanted to check on how we're doing." But Richard didn't believe her. His mind was filled with dark thoughts, imagining all kinds of scenarios. What if she was lying? What if she was planning to leave him and take everything he had worked for? The thought was unbearable. That night, as Claire slept beside him, Richard lay awake, his mind racing. He couldn't live like this anymore, trapped in his fears and insecurities. He needed to know the truth, once and for all. In the darkness, he made a decision. He would confront Claire the next day and reveal everything. He would tell her that he wasn't really blind and that he had been testing her love all along. He would watch her reaction closely and finally see her true feelings. The next morning, Richard woke up with a heavy heart. He had spent the night practicing what he would say and how he would reveal the truth. As Claire helped him dress, he felt a pang of guilt for what he was about to do. "Claire," he began, his voice shaking. "There's something I need to tell you." She paused, sensing that something was wrong. "What is it, Richard?" He took a deep breath, trying to steady himself. I haven't been honest with you. I'm not blind." There was a moment of silence, and Richard could feel Claire's shock. She pulled away slightly, her hands trembling. "What do you mean?" "I faked the accident," Richard admitted, his voice full of emotion. "I pretended to be blind because I needed to know if you really loved me or if you were just after my money. I couldn't stand the thought of being used again, so I tested you." Claire's reaction was not what Richard had expected. Instead of anger, tears welled up in her eyes. She stared at him, hurt and disbelief on her face. You pretended to be blind? For a whole year?" Her voice trembled with emotion. "Why didn't you trust me, Richard? Why did you feel you had to do this?" Richard struggled to find the right words, overwhelmed by the pain in Claire's voice. "I didn't want to hurt you, Claire. I've been hurt before. I've been with women who only cared about my money. And I was terrified of that happening again. I needed to know if you truly loved me. Claire shook her head, tears flowing freely now. And what did you find out, Richard? Did you think I was lying to you this whole time? Did you think I was just pretending to care? Richard's heart broke as he saw the pain in her eyes. No, he said softly, reaching out to her. No, Claire. You've been nothing but loving and kind. You've shown me more love than I ever imagined. But I let my own fears and insecurities blind me. Claire looked away, her shoulders shaking with silent sobs. How could you do this to me? I gave you everything, Richard. I stood by you when you were at your weakest, and you repaid me with lies. Richard felt deep shame. He thought he was protecting himself, but he had been hurting the one person who had stood by him through everything. I'm so sorry, Claire, he whispered. I never meant to hurt you. I was wrong, and I see that now. Claire wiped her tears, her voice trembling. You were wrong, Richard. You didn't just doubt my love, you doubted me as a person. How can we build a life together if you don't trust me? Richard felt a pang of fear. The truth was out now, and he could see the damage he had done. Please, Claire, he pleaded. Give me a chance to make this right. I love you, and I'll do whatever it takes to earn your trust back. Claire looked at him, her expression full of hurt and exhaustion. Richard, I love you too. But trust isn't something you can just ask for. It has to be earned, and you've broken mine. Her words hit Richard hard, making him see how big of a mistake he had made. He thought he could control everything, even love. But in trying to do so, he lost sight of what really mattered. I know, he said quietly, his voice full of regret. I know I made a terrible mistake, but I'll do whatever it takes to make it right. I want to prove to you that my love is real, just like you've proven yours to me. Claire's eyes softened a bit, but the pain was still there. Richard, I don't know if things can ever go back to the way they were. I need time to think and process all of this. I can't just forgive you right away. Richard nodded, understanding how serious the situation was. Take all the time you need, Claire. I'll be here waiting, and I'll spend every day proving I'm worthy of your love. Claire stood up slowly. I'm going to stay with my mother for a few days. I need some space to figure out how I feel. Richard's heart sank, but he knew it was the least he could do. I understand. I'll be here when you're ready. Claire nodded, her face still showing the pain she felt. She packed a small bag, avoiding eye contact with Richard. When she finally looked at him, there was a deep sadness in her eyes that made Richard's chest tighten. Goodbye, Richard, she said softly, her voice full of quiet resignation. Goodbye, Claire, Richard replied, barely able to speak. He watched her walk out the door, the weight of his actions pressing down on him like a heavy burden. The days that followed were some of the longest and most painful of Richard's life. The large house, once filled with warmth and laughter, now felt cold and empty. Every room reminded him of Claire, the sound of her laughter, the feel of her touch, the scent of her perfume lingering in the air. Richard spent his days filled with regret, thinking deeply about what he had done. He realized how much his own insecurities had driven his actions, how he had let fear control his decisions. He was so focused on testing Claire's love that he didn't think about how much it would hurt their relationship. He tried to reach out to Claire every day, sending her messages and flowers, but she stayed distant. Each day without her felt like an eternity, and Richard had to face the possibility that he might lose her for good. In the quiet of his home, Richard started to see things more clearly. He realized that trust can't be tested or forced. It must be built on respect and honesty. He had ruined that trust with his lies. As the weeks went by, Richard grew more anxious each day that Claire stayed away. He wondered if she would ever return or forgive him. The uncertainty was hard to bear, but he knew he had to give her the space she needed. During this time, Richard decided to make changes in his life.
He began seeing a therapist to deal with his insecurities and past issues. He wanted to become a better person, someone who truly deserved Claire's love. He also started volunteering at a local charity, finding comfort in helping others and giving back.
Richard knew that fixing things would be a long and hard process, but he was ready to do whatever it took for Claire. He loved her deeply and wanted to rebuild the trust he had broken. One evening, while Richard was in his study, he heard the front door open. His heart raced as he stood up, feeling a mix of hope and fear. Claire stood in the doorway, looking different, stronger and more confident. Richard's breath caught as he saw her, the woman he loved more than anything. "Claire," he said softly, full of emotion. "I'm so glad you're here." She nodded, her eyes steady. "I've had a lot of time to think, Richard." Richard swallowed hard, not knowing what to expect. "And?" Claire took a deep breath. "I've realized that love isn't just about good times. It's about getting through tough times together. You made a big mistake, but I can see you're truly sorry and trying to change." Richard felt hopeful, but stayed cautious. "I am trying, Claire. I want to be better for you. For us." Claire nodded, her face softening. "Trust takes time to rebuild. It won't happen right away." "I understand," Richard said sincerely. "I'll do whatever it takes." Claire looked at him for a moment and then smiled, a small but real smile. "I'm willing to try, Richard, but we need to be honest with each other from now on. No more secrets or lies." Richard felt a weight lift from his shoulders. "No more secrets, I promise." Claire moved closer, and Richard took her hand. The touch warmed him, and he knew he had been given a second chance. "I love you, Claire," he whispered, his voice full of emotion. "I love you too, Richard," she replied. "But love alone isn't enough. We need trust, respect, and honesty. Can we work on that together?" Richard nodded, feeling grateful and hopeful. "Yes, Claire. Together we can rebuild everything." Hand in hand, Richard felt renewed hope. He knew the road ahead would be tough, but with Claire by his side, he was ready to face any challenge. In the weeks that followed, Richard and Claire began the slow process of rebuilding their relationship. It wasn't easy. There were moments of doubt, hurt, and frustration, but they knew that moving forward meant being patient and understanding with each other. They began by spending more quality time together, rediscovering what had first drawn them close. They took long walks, shared quiet dinners, and talked late into the night about their fears, hopes, and dreams. Richard learned to listen better and be more aware of Claire's needs and feelings. Claire, in turn, started to trust him again, gradually letting her guard down. Richard continued his therapy, working on his deep-seated issues. He shared his progress with Claire, who supported him throughout. This was a healing process for both their relationship and Richard as an individual. They also went to couples counseling to help them deal with their relationship's challenges. The counselor taught them how to communicate better and express their needs without blaming or getting defensive. It was hard work, but they were both committed to making it work. Claire noticed Richard's efforts to change. She saw that he was genuinely trying to improve, not just for her, but for himself. This made her walls around her heart start to come down. One evening, after a tough counseling session, they sat together in their cozy living room, the fire softly crackling in the background. Richard took Claire's hand, looking serious yet tender. "Claire," he said, "I know I've said this before, but I'm so sorry for what I did. I let my fear control me and hurt you. I don't deserve your forgiveness, but I'm grateful you're giving me a chance to make things right." Claire squeezed his hand gently, her eyes softening. "Richard, what you did hurt me deeply, but seeing how hard you've worked to change, it means a lot to me. It shows you truly care and are willing to fight for us." Richard nodded, feeling emotional. "I'll spend my life making up for my mistakes, Claire. I love you more than anything and never want to lose you." Claire smiled, a genuine smile that reached her eyes. "I love you too, Richard. I'm starting to believe that we can make this work and build something even stronger than before. For the first time in weeks, Richard felt a deep peace. It wasn't the end of their journey, but it was a significant step forward, proof that they were on the right path. As the months went by, Richard and Claire continued to rebuild their relationship, one day at a time. They learned to trust each other again, communicate openly, and support each other through life's ups and downs. It wasn't always easy, but they knew their love was worth fighting for. What do you think about this story? Leave a comment below this video. Thanks for watching.